Then we start live. Okay. All right, I think we're good. Let me go ahead and share my screen for now. Okay, looks good. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get this started. So welcome in everybody once again. So in today's session, we are GoElite. We're doing this webinar session with ZF Visa with Travis Feuerbacher. He is a very experienced former U.S. consul and immigration attorney. Welcome, Travis, to our webinar. Travis, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, Ryan. I'm excited to talk about visas with you all. I was a career foreign service officer, which is a fancy way of saying a diplomat for the United States government, for about 7 years. And for most of that time, I was a visa officer working abroad. I've interviewed tens of thousands of people, many of which were students. And so I'm excited to talk to you about student visas today.
For sure. Thank you so much for introduction, Travers. We already see some people popping out questions in the QA. We love that. So just give everybody a brief picture of what we're going to talk about. So today will be mostly centered about F-1 visa interviews, and then also what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And then we're going to talk about some specific cases. For example, home country versus third country. What are the pros and cons? And then we're going to discuss red flags to avoid in your F-1 interviews. And then F-1 stamping during CPT or OPT. We know it's going to be complicated. How should we get prepared for that? And we're going to leave as bigger room as possible for live Q&A with Travis. So if you have a question coming in, feel free to send them in the Q&A right now. Our colleague will collect them and we'll try to answer them all for you. If you have any follow-up question after today's session, you can absolutely feel free to scan the QR code. We will connect you with Travers, or we can answer any question for you if we can't. So moving on, I will talk a little bit about our company as the host. So GoElite, we're located in Los Angeles. We are a professional consulting agencies, mainly work with universities. So our primary services will be day one CPT school applications, F-1 reinstatement, emergency transfer, as well as change of status. So our mission is always to make international students' dream come true by assisting them. And we are certified by AIRC as, one of the most respectful organizations in the US. And we are also on Google reviews, so feel free to check us out on Google. We currently have more than 400 Google reviews. So a lot of comments from our previous students, our clients, feel free to check them out. And at the end, I want to share our contact information about as well as our social media. So if you wanted to learn more, feel free to get into any of them. We're very happy to have you. And without further ado, I will stop my sharing. And Travis, you can go ahead and start today's session.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. So I will get some slides up here. So before I begin, just a quick note that I am a licensed U.S. immigration lawyer, but the point of this session is not for me to provide legal advice. I do want to give you some good tips and best practices for your visa journey and for the visa interview. But if you have specific questions, please reach out to a qualified immigration lawyer. If you want to reach out to me, my email address is at the bottom. I deal with people almost every day who have acted on bad advice that they found online. And so please, if you don't reach out to me, reach out to a qualified professional and get good advice. So with that, I mentioned a little bit about myself. I did spend about 7 years with the US State Department. Most of that time was abroad as a visa officer, and I've interviewed tens of thousands of applicants. Now, when I was a visa officer, I did deny many people. And quite often, I denied applicants who may have qualified for a visa, but they simply weren't prepared or they just didn't really understand how to explain themselves to me so that I could reach a better decision. So since leaving the State Department, my partner Mandy and Mandy's also a former visa officer and a U.S. immigration attorney. She has done a session with Ryan as well. Mandy and I started a law firm called John Feuerbacher Visa and Immigration. We are focused on helping people navigate through this visa process. We offer one-on-one mock interviews with, ourselves as former visa officers. And then we help people that have other complications. Maybe they're stuck in administrative processing. Maybe they've been arrested in the past or they've been refused before. Whatever those issues are, reach out to us if you have specific questions and we'll see how we can help. But today, I want to talk a little bit about the F-1 journey with a focus on that visa interview. So I think many people on this call are probably somewhere on this journey. Maybe you're preparing for your first visa interview, or maybe you're already studying and you're in CPT or pre-graduation, pre-completion OPT. Maybe you've already graduated. Now you're in post-graduation OPT or even STEM OPT. At some point, your student visa will expire and you may need to leave the country and come back. Maybe you want to go on a holiday somewhere. Maybe you want to go home and visit your family. And so you will need to renew your F-1 visa. Some of you may also decide to go on to your next level of education. Maybe you completed your bachelor's degree and now you're thinking about a master's degree. Well, at all of these different junctures, you will need to take some sort of step to either extend your status as a student or ultimately renew your student visa, your F-1 visa. And to do that, you really have two options. So the easiest option, but not necessarily the best option, is to stay in the United States and apply to either extend or change your status with U.S. Customs and Immigration Service, USCIS. This may keep you in a legal status and it may enable you to go on to that next educational program. But if you have to leave the country, this will not get you permission to come back to the United States. And so think about the possibility of an emergency. Maybe a family member is sick and you need to go home. You may then need to reapply for a new student visa. And if you've looked at the wait times to schedule an interview lately, that could take months. And so during that entire time, you can't go to class, you can't come back and, handle things in your apartment. It can create a lot of complications. So what I always recommend is that people explore the possibility of leaving the country at some point when they have some time and then reapplying for their student visa, renewing their visa stamp. Now, this does have some potential complications of its own. You may be denied. You may be delayed. You may be placed into administrative processing delays, but there are ways to minimize those complications and maybe address those complications. And that's what I want to focus on for the rest of this presentation. So to start, last year, and this is a little bit alarming, but last year, over 1 in every 3 student visa applicants was either refused or they were delayed at their visa interview. And for many students, it's no surprise that if you're delayed more than just a couple of weeks, that might as well be a refusal because that might mean you missed the start of class and then you're delaying or deferring your plans by a semester or maybe even a year. And so, as I mentioned earlier, many of those denials are avoidable. The law is actually a little strange here. The law actually says that a visa officer has to deny an applicant unless the applicant can essentially convince the officer that they deserve the visa. And what does that mean? The officer needs to be pretty sure, pretty convinced that you're going to the United States to enroll in school, to study, to attend class, and ultimately either graduate or complete your program. And then, of course, they need to understand that you have the ability to pay for school. So if you don't volunteer, if you're not proactive and you don't volunteer those details to the officer, you might fit into one of this alarmingly high number. So let's talk about some tips to improve your chance of success. So above all else, be honest. This is the most important thing that I can tell anybody. Assume that your visa officer already knows everything about you. They know that you've been arrested or that, somebody applied for a green card on your behalf. Don't hide anything. Be very transparent, be very forthcoming, and you'll avoid many complications down the road. And then beyond that, be yourself, be authentic. If you think about where you are in your educational journey, you didn't just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to study in the United States. This was the result of a long process, a long decision-making journey that you went on. So think about why you made that decision to go all the way to the United States, to spend all of this money and all of this time to get this degree. What does this mean for you? Why are you passionate about this? How did you arrive at this decision? That's what the visa officer needs to know, because that's how they understand that you're actually a student and you deserve a student visa. And then, of course, confidence helps. Lack of confidence hurts. But how can you be confident if you don't know what to expect and if you're not prepared? So I want to talk a little bit about what to expect at your interview and how to prepare. So first of all, when I was a visa officer in Beijing, China, as an example, I would interview over 200 visa applicants on a day, usually. Sometimes it was over 250 in one day. I would go home exhausted at the end of every day. It was a lot of work. But what that means is I maybe had 1, 2, maybe 3 minutes at the most with every visa applicant that came up to my window. So I needed to maximize my time. I was very impatient, and I didn't have a lot of time to pull details out of an applicant. I also spent a lot of time looking through DS 160 responses that each applicant submitted. So I may not have been looking at the applicant the entire interview. I may be looking instead at a different monitor, scrolling through things. I may be typing notes. And so don't be alarmed if the officer isn't smiling at you and acting nice to you, because they've got a lot of work that they're doing. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, the law requires you, it puts the responsibility on you to provide the details and the explanation to the officer to prove that you qualify and that you deserve the visa. If you don't do that, the officer has a large ability, a big, huge, sweeping authority to deny your application for virtually any reason. If the officer just has too many questions, too many concerns, that they don't feel confident enough that you're actually a student and you're planning to go to the United States to study, they can deny you. And so again, it's your responsibility to be proactive and to volunteer those details to the officer that the officer needs to know to understand your situation and ultimately, hopefully, decide that you deserve the visa. So what are those details? Well, first, I would recommend that you start by quickly introducing where you're going to school and what you will study. I'm going to UCLA for a master's in business administration, something very quick and simple. And then focus some time on why you chose that school, why you decided to study that particular topic or obtain that particular degree, and what that means for your future. And this is where that authenticity is super important. Because again, the visa officer wants to understand how you reached this decision to study at this particular school, to focus on this particular topic, and why this is going to make a difference in your career or your life. Maybe you're interested in starting a business, and so you're getting an MBA to give you the knowledge to set up and run a business. Maybe you want to work at a large tech company, and so that computer science degree is going to get you to where you can be competitive for that job. You should talk about these things because that is the way, students think. And that's what a visa officer wants to understand. And then finally, you should volunteer. Don't wait for the officer to ask you. You should volunteer how you plan to pay for the education. School in the United States is expensive. A lot of us took out student loans that we repaid over decades. This is very common. And so the visa officer wants to know that you've thought about that and that you have a very specific plan to pay for your school. And so don't just say, I can afford it. Think about how you demonstrate that you can afford it. If maybe your father is going to pay for your school, talk about what your father does for work. Where does his money come from? Does he work for a company and he manages 7 people and he's responsible for this and this? Does he own properties that maybe he rents out? Be very specific, because the officer needs to understand that you have the ability to pay for your school. Now, one drawback of this law that basically says if you're unable to convince the officer to issue your visa, you're going to be denied, is that any complication can increase your chance of a denial. Because again, if an officer has too many open questions or too many unknowns, they're not going to feel confident enough to approve your application. So some complications are avoidable, like try not to get arrested if you can avoid that. But other complications are not avoidable. So things like having family members in the United States, maybe somebody applied for a green card on your behalf. That's not automatically going to disqualify you, but you need to be honest about it. Make sure you admit to that in your DS-160 form. If the officer asks you about it, be prepared to talk about it. Sometimes people will decide to get a second degree at the same level that they've already studied before. Maybe you already have a bachelor's degree and you're getting a second bachelor's degree or a second master's degree. The officer is going to be a little skeptical about that because, again, we want to see some progression in your life. Your school should be helping you move forward. And so it's a little weird if you already have one master's degree to now go and get a second one. But there's probably a good reason why you made that decision. So volunteer why this is what you want to do and why this fits into kind of your life plan. I did mention arrests a minute ago. If you have any criminal issues, even if they seem kind of trivial, even if you were never charged, even if the case was dropped, you may still need to note that in your application and maybe in your interview. So reach out to an immigration lawyer and explore your options here. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but make sure that you have an expert that's guiding you. So finally, I do want to focus a little bit more on two issues. I think Ryan alluded to this earlier. What if you're going to a school that enables you to work in a CPT program on the first day of class? And what if you have a gap in your education? Maybe you graduated from high school or your country's equivalent 10 years ago, and now you're going to get your bachelor's degree, or now you're going to get your master's degree. How do you explain that? And what complications might that raise? So let's talk about day one CPT programs first. Now, to be clear, CPT is an amazing opportunity. It's something that gives you real world experience. You can build your network. It's really great if you can get into a school that will enable this. However, I will tell you that you might be met with a skeptical visa officer because the student visa was designed not so that you could work. It was designed so that you could go to school and ultimately graduate and get a degree. And so the visa officer wants to make sure, again, that you're a student, that you're planning predominantly to go to the United States, enroll in class, and that is going to be your primary focus so that you can ultimately pass your classes and graduate. Now, the fact that you can work is great, but if the officer thinks that that's really the only reason you're going to the United States, they're likely to deny your application and advise you that you need to get a work visa, because that's really the reason that you're traveling. So in your interview, focus first and predominantly on your school plans, your education plans. Explain again where you're going to school, what degree you're seeking, why this is important to your future. This is the reason you're getting the visa. Now, you should explain where you will be working, what the CPT experience means, why it's important to you. But I would say that should be maybe 10% of your focus. Your real focus at your interview needs to be on the fact that you are a student and you're going to the United States to study. Now let's talk a little bit about gaps in education. Assuming that maybe you graduated from high school 10 years ago and now you're getting a bachelor's degree, or graduated with a bachelor's degree, now you're getting a master's degree. This happens all the time. And again, this is not an automatic reason for you to be denied, but you should be proactive and you should be prepared to volunteer an explanation of what you did between your last degree or certificate and now. And this is actually, I like to think of this as an opportunity to provide some positive details. So think about all the things, all the investments that you've made towards this next educational milestone. Maybe you took the GRE or the GMAT test. Maybe you studied English. Maybe you taught yourself Python programming. Maybe you've, taken some online courses somewhere. Maybe you've worked. Think about all the different things you've accomplished and all the things you've done and explain that. And then, why is now the time to go back to school? I'm sure there's a reason why you want to get your bachelor's degree or master's degree or PhD at this point. So explain that. And remember to think about how this will play into kind of your life plan. What is this degree going to do for you now that maybe it wouldn't have done 5 years ago? So that's why you want to do this now. And again, remember, be authentic, be passionate about this. You're excited for this opportunity, I would assume. So I want that to come through when you talk to your visa officer. Show them that this is important to you. So I also want to talk about CPT and OPT for those of you who need to renew their visa during that period of time. Again, I'm a big fan of work opportunities. I think they're great. I think everybody should try to take part in this. But there is a significant amount of fraud that the State Department has uncovered with both CPT and OPT programs. Students have been caught paying companies to say that they were working when maybe they were, sleeping on a couch or partying or something. And so you will probably expect a little bit of skepticism if you are in the middle of a CPT or an OPT program. The officer is going to want to make sure, and they're going to want to verify that you're actually working and that you are kind of remaining in your student status. And so you should be prepared to explain with details where you're working and what you're doing. You should make sure that you have proof that this is all authorized. So bring your I-20 form, make sure you've got your, CPT or OPT authorization on that, and bring your employment authorization so that there's no question that you're doing everything legally and by the books, as we would say. And then again, talk about why you're doing this in the first place. How does this tie into your plans after your authorization ends? How is this related to the degree that you are trying to obtain or that you already obtained? And finally, bring your transcripts. For anybody that is renewing a visa while they are studying, this is basically a requirement. It's not a nice to have. Almost every visa officer will ask for your transcripts. And if you just graduated, it's also nice to bring that. Why is that the case? Again, it's because the F-1 visa is designed to give you that authorization to go to school in the United States. That's what you should be focused on. So the visa officer is going to want to verify that you have been attending class and you've been moving towards or progressing towards graduation. There's no requirement that you have a perfect 4.0 grade point average or that, you don't fail any class. We all know that happens. You can fail a class. You can have an incomplete as long as you're still showing that you're progressing towards a graduation. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then Ryan is going to be a visa officer with me. We're going to do a little bit of example here. Last thing I want to talk about is where and when to schedule your interview. It is no surprise, I think, to probably everybody that is attending this, that in many parts of the world, the wait time to schedule an interview is extremely long. And I'll give you an example here. This is from just a few days ago on the State Department's website. You have to wait 106 calendar days to schedule a student visa interview in Mumbai at the moment. That basically means that if you go to schedule an interview today, you should plan for that interview to be in the spring. That's not acceptable if you're trying to return to class or return to your work or start a new class maybe in August. So what do? Well, a couple of things might be an option for you. First, I would consider applying for an expedited interview appointment. If you have not been refused before, you may very well qualify for an earlier interview slot. Generally, the way to do that is to go onto the portal where you schedule your interview in the first place, schedule the earliest interview you can, pay the necessary fee. Then you can go back to that portal and request an earlier time. Now, if you don't qualify or you're not granted an earlier interview slot, particularly if you've been refused for a student visa before, you should probably expect that you won't be granted an earlier slot. What do you do then? Well, that's where your option may be to go to a different country. So there will be some potential complications if that's the decision you make. First, visa officers in any country that they're assigned to, they are taught local customs. They're taught the local language in most cases. And then after just a few weeks of being in that country, they become very accustomed to interacting with people from that country. When I was in China, for example, I was very, very used to seeing Chinese passports and to speaking Chinese in my very broken Mandarin with applicants. If somebody showed up at my window with a Russian passport or an Iranian passport or a French passport, my first thought was, why is this person here? What are they doing here? So before anything, you should volunteer an explanation of why you're in a different country. And it could be something as simple as, I couldn't get an interview time soon enough at home, and so I came here because you had an appointment that would fit within my schedule. That's perfectly fine. But just, address that potential concern before the officer asks you. Now, another couple of tips. I always tell people to think about large consulates or large embassies, places where there's a lot of, people from all over the world that may be transiting through. And that's because you will be probably likely to be in front of a visa officer that's more accustomed to seeing different passports and interacting with people from outside of just one country. And then the last thing I would say is, before you make plans to go to Hong Kong or London or wherever you're planning to interview, go to that embassy or consulate's website and verify that you, as what we call a third country national, meaning you're not from that country, you're not from the United States, you're from a third country, confirm that you will be able to interview at that post. Some posts will not allow that, most will, but it's a good idea to confirm that first. So before Ryan and I give you a couple of example interviews, good and bad, I do want to mention an online training course that we have. This is something we launched a couple of months ago. It has proven to be very valuable for many student applicants. And so currently, if you go to zfvisaguides.com, you'll see that we have a course that's specifically on how to complete the DS-160 form. We have a course that's focused on how to prepare for your visa interview. And we go through many more tips and examples of how to volunteer those key details to your visa officer. And then we have a complete F-1 guide that goes from the entire F-1 end-to-end journey. And it includes a bi-weekly live Q&A session with either myself or my partner, Mandy, so that you can ask any of those lingering student visa questions that you might have. And for anybody that wants to take a look at that, that was part of this event. If you go to the complete course and you type in GoElite F1 at checkout, we'll give you a 25% discount. The only thing we ask is that you send us an email after you've gone through the course and you give us your feedback. We are constantly adding and changing and optimizing our lessons. And so we want to hear from you. So with that, Ryan, let's do a little bit of interview here.
All right.
So for the first interview, I've asked Ryan to be a visa officer. So we're all gonna judge him very, very in depth here. But Ryan's gonna ask me some, or I'm sorry, I got this backwards. The first interview, I'm gonna be the visa officer. Then we'll give Ryan his moment to shine. So I'm gonna ask Ryan some questions. He's going to answer my questions, and then you'll probably quickly discern whether this is a good example or a bad example. And then I'll give you some insight after that. So Ryan, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So Ryan, where are you going to study in the United States?
California.
Okay, what school?
California University of California.
All right, what are you going to study?
Economics.
This is a master's degree, bachelor's degree.
Master's.
All right, how are you going to pay for this?
My dad is gonna pay.
What does your dad do?
He owns a company,
Okay, what kind of company?
hotel.
Okay, do you have a, all right, you know what? I don't really have time for this. I'm really sorry, but I'm unable to approve your application today. Here's a piece of paper that explains my decision. You can reapply at any time. All right, so what happened here? Ryan did what almost 50% of the student visa applicants did when I was a visa officer. He answered my questions, but he did not give me anything I needed to conclude that he deserved that visa. He had so many opportunities to be authentic, to tell me where he's going to school, why he's so excited about that, why, this means so much to his life. I asked him about his father more than one question to try to somehow verify that he could afford his education. He gave me nothing. For all I know, his father owns some one-room hotel in some alleyway that nobody has ever stayed in. I don't really have any confidence that he's actually going to the United States to enroll in class and ultimately graduate. And so he may definitely be a student. He may definitely be going to get his master's degree. But in an interview like that, if he's not prepared to tell me who he is, that's probably the outcome he should expect. So now Ryan will be the visa officer. We'll see how he does, and I will be the applicant. So we'll give a bit of a different example here.
All right. So I'm just gonna ask you one thing. So where are you going to study in the US?
By the way, I'm sorry. Before we start, let me set the stage, Ryan. Sorry, we'll try that again.
Sure.
I am an Indian student, but I am applying in Hong Kong because I could not find an interview in time. So I want to make that clear, and then now we can start again. Sorry, Ryan.
For sure. Where are you going to study in the US?
Hi, so I'm going for my Master's of Business Administration at UCLA in Los Angeles, California. You probably saw from my passport that I'm from India, but I'm here in Hong Kong right now because unfortunately I couldn't find an interview time before the start of my class. So I'm excited to be here with you today. I have been working for the last 7 years as a product manager, and I've really been thinking about starting my own business, but I have a lot of questions about how a business runs. And so I started thinking about getting a business degree so that I could understand all those things, like human resources and trying to get some investment to start my business. So I took the GMAT test. I got a pretty good score. I've got my score here if you want to see it. And thankfully, UCLA gave me an offer of admission. So I'm super excited to go to Southern California. I've always been a Lakers fan, so now maybe I can go to a Lakers game. And my parents are going to pay for this. My father works for Deloitte as a consultant back in my hometown, and my mother runs her own business. She's a general manager of a company that manufactures various computer components. And she supports, companies all around the world. I think she's got about 140 employees that work in her factory. And I have the bank statements from my parents here if you would like to see those.
Right. Excellent. Approved.
Fantastic. So what I just did there is not natural. It's not the way that human beings typically interact, because I rambled for a long time, even though Ryan just asked me where I was going to study. But what I did is I provided all the details that that Ryan, the visa officer, needed to hopefully conclude that I'm definitely a student. I gave him all the reasons why I wanted to do this program, why I chose UCLA, why this is important to me. And then I also told him not just my parents can pay for this, but I gave him an understanding of how they can pay for this. And I even volunteered some documents, which might help. So that is what I would suggest all of you think about. And again, it's something that we definitely focus on in our online training, because this is the most crucial part of your visa journey, whether it's your first application, or you're just trying to renew your visa stamp. So Q&A time, Ryan?
Let's get to it. I'm gonna share my screen, everybody, and we have collected everyone's questions. So if you have a question right now, feel free to shoot it into the Q&A sessions. We're going ahead and get this started. All right, first, hi, Travis. I'm going to renew my F-1 visa in China. My wife holds an H-1B and is going back with me. If the visa officer asks me, do I have relatives? Should I say yes or no?
This is kind of it's a good question. So if you get, if you want to be super technical here, your wife isn't in the US right now, and so you should say no. My recommendation, though, is you go ahead and say yes, and just volunteer the fact that your wife is on an H-1B and she's about to return to her job and what she actually does. This will show the visa officer that you are doing your best to be totally honest and transparent, and there won't be any questions. You may get a question or two about what she does for work, but at least you're showing honesty.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the next one. This one's actually also a very good questions because we get asked about this a lot. So if I had a J1 visa before, that was on a whole residency requirements. Now I need to get an F1 visa. Will that cause me any issue?
It could, but it depends on a number of factors. So this is more of kind of a legal question. I would urge you to reach out to an immigration lawyer, reach out to us if you want to. But we would need to know much more about your situation to give you an answer, unfortunately.
Right, absolutely. Let's just move on. And I think number 3 might be also a complicated situation. Let us just first take a look at it to see if we can answer them for now. So I'm an F1. I have an approved I-140. Now I'm doing CPT, day 1 CPT, maybe, with the company. My situation is one of my family is in a critical medical conditions. I have to renew my F1. Do you have any general tips or advice for this person?
This is a good question. And I'll say, generally speaking, I mentioned, a potential emergency earlier. I would always suggest that you kind of monitor the status or the expiration date of your F1 visa kind of throughout your journey. And when you're getting closer to that expiration date, if you have time to do so, maybe you're in a summer break, for example, that might be the time to go home and renew your visa. Then if an emergency does happen, you can go and deal with the emergency, and then you're not, desperate to renew your visa in a short period of time. Now, in your case, something bad has happened. First of all, I hope that your family member is okay. Do I think that you can renew your visa? There's certainly a chance of success. I would say you need to be very open and honest about the I-140 petition, and then focus on your school. Focus on if you're still in school, focus on that. Bring your transcripts. If all you're doing is CPT, focus on what you're doing and then your plans after CPT. And, again, be prepared for some questions that go to the specifics of what you're doing and trying to figure out if you're still in status or, if you've just been working.
That's a great answer. Speaking of preparations, if you wanted to get in touch with Travis or Mandy to get some more preparations and training, because they, as former US visa officers, they deal with situations like this or interview people like your situation before. So if you wanted to get into that, scan the QR code. We can connect you with them so that you guys can have further conversations. And let's go to the next questions. Hi, Travis. My question for F1 renewal is that, can I answer that I sponsor my own tuition and my parents can be the backup, or should I just say my parents do it to make it more simple?
So I get this question a lot. My answer here is, think about your financial situation as kind of a binary situation. You either have enough money to pay for your school and living expenses or you don't. Now, in your case, if you yourself have enough money in savings, or maybe you have some income that's coming in and it will be sufficient, that's what I would focus on. If it's maybe not enough, or if you do honestly plan for a parent or an uncle or an aunt or somebody to kind of help supplement that funding, then absolutely your honest response would be to mention them as well. And again, be prepared to explain in detail where that money comes from. Because really it's just it all comes down to, what is your plan? I'm guessing that you've put a lot of thought into how you're going to pay all this expensive education and related bills. So just explain the plan that you've come up with, and you should be okay.
Sounds good. Moving on, another green card related questions as well. So it could be complicated. So an EB3 processing ongoing, and I have tried my H-1B lottery, but no luck. Any tips on how should I proceed with interview considering this information? I'm assuming this person is proceeding with F1, but I don't know your F1 background yet. So I think this question might be complicated to answer. Travis, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It might be complicated, but assuming this person is going for an F1 for a student visa, this is one of those complicating factors that comes with CPT work or OPT work. And so what you'll need to do is focus in your interview on your plans for school. Because again, with an F1 visa, the predominant reason, the main reason you're seeking that is to be a student. So the problem here is that you've shown kind of a lot of effort to work in the United States. And the risk is that your visa officer might conclude that the real reason you're seeking this visa is just so that you can get into the country and work. You weren't able to get an H-1B, your EB3 process is going to take, however long it's going to take. And so you're not really going to be a student, you're just going to work. And so again, focus on your status as a student, and that's how you can improve your chance of success.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. Is it okay to express my intention of working with CPT during the visa interview? Should I bring it up?
I think you should. Visa officers generally know which schools offer day one CPT opportunities. And so I think, generally speaking, CPT should be somehow related to what you're studying anyway. So, it probably is part of your opportunity. Again, focus on your education, but I do think you should mention and volunteer your plans here.
For sure. Let's move on. Is that okay to apply for a bachelor in the US while I have a bachelor in my home country already? And then also, if I do so, if I go to the visa interviews, is there going to be a problem? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, 100% it's okay to do this, but you need to explain to the visa officer why you're doing this. So in your specific case, you've got a degree in education. Now you want a degree in nursing. That's a little bit of a different path from what you've been down already. So why did you change your mind? Why are you now going down a different path to become a nurse? Is this something you've always dreamed of doing? Is there another reason? That is what the visa officer will be wondering.
Right. Moving on. This one will be a more specific situation. If someone already has 2 masters, okay, and they and the person did used H-1B after the 2 masters, now he's going back to school. So he's going back to day 1 CPT with the 3rd master's. So this person wanted to know in general, like, what is his chance of applying for visa stamping? Or should the person just not going to stamping at all?
I mean, this is where it gets really complicated because, it gets more and more difficult to explain. Now you're on your 3rd degree at the same level. What a visa officer is probably going to conclude is you're really just trying to be in the United States. This is your excuse to enter the country and then do whatever you're doing. With your EB2, EB3 filing, you're right that you've kind of shown an intent to move to the US and work in the US. And so your chance of success will go down in a situation like this. It's not necessarily a situation where you're 100% going to be denied, but I would need to understand more details about your situation.
For sure. I think in situations like this, again, we're not giving any legal consultation or advice. So I do recommend, the person in the situations to reach out to more professionals to consult about it, immigration lawyers, so that you can have a more clear understanding of, what you're going to expect. All right, let's move on. This one, my F-1 got rejected during the interview, and I'm kind of suspecting the reason. So I had an H1B revoked in 2022. I didn't mention that in the DS-160s. Could that be an issue?
It could be. I would need to spend some time with you to actually try to pinpoint what the issue was. But let me use this as an opportunity to talk about the DS-160 for a second. Once you submit the DS-160 form, you can't change anything on it. People reach out to me multiple times a day asking about, oh my goodness, I just found that there was a mistake, or I found that I didn't mention something. My advice in that situation is almost always to submit a new DS-160 form and make sure that you update your application ID number from the new form with the interview that you scheduled, so that that is the correct information that your visa officer sees. Now, if you do have a mistake or an error and you don't change it, you do risk a denial, like may have happened to this applicant. And at the worst, you risk a punishment. There's a possibility that a visa officer will see that you withheld a key detail on that form, and they decide that you lied on purpose to try to get a visa. And the ramification of that is that you will never qualify for a visa or a green card again without a lengthy process called a waiver, and that gets very complicated. So again, make sure that everything you answer on the DS-160 is correct. If you do find an error, hopefully you find it before your interview, submit a new one. If you find an error after your interview, make sure that the next form you file is correct, and be prepared to explain that it was a mistake. Hopefully it was a mistake. And note that you're trying to be as truthful as possible.
Thank you. I think this is a very comprehensive answer and very helpful. Let's move on. This is another one of these very good questions. So if I'm under a green card application process, don't know which stage you are, should I need to mention it? Also, when they ask me about my plans after graduation, should that include the green card, the approval, and everything, which is being in the US?
So yes, you should mention it 100%. Be honest. When you talk about plans after graduation, that's a tough one because I want you to be honest. But what you might think about is the green card is not approved yet. That petition could take years, or maybe it could just take another 2 days. It depends on your situation. So think about what might happen if it's not yet approved, and maybe you have to go back home. What would your plans look like there? And that's probably where I would focus. But again, this will rely upon your unique situation. You may want to reach out to a lawyer and talk about that.
Sure. Thank you so much. Let's move on. This one would be more about day one CPT. So I think to add a little bit onto this questions, this person wanted to know if the school is a little bit further away from his, residence. Would that be questions in the F-1 interview? And I will also wanted to ask, would the visa officer know your residence? Because you might write it down already in the DS-160, or they generally don't know.
Well, they will know if you put it in the DS-160 form. They may ask you. And so let's assume that they know somehow. Yes, if it was me, I would ask questions about this. Because again, the reason that you're seeking this visa is to go to class. It's not to work. Work is kind of a byproduct of the visa. And so in this case, it almost sounds like to me that you're not going to school, you're going to work, and you're just going to kind of go to school to maintain your status. So I would be a little bit concerned about that. Again, there's probably some individual circumstances that we would need to go through.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on. And before we move on to the next questions, I do have a recommendation on the school selection side. We generally do not recommend you to go to a school that is very, very far away from you. Generally speaking,
That's
if you're
good
on the
advice,
West Coast,
Ryan.
I'm not recommending you to go to the East Coast unless you have to. All right, move on to the next one. if you are done with your STEM OPT time and thought of enrolling into another master's degree, what are the chances of F1 approval? I know we do not generally speak the approval rate or anything like that, but just any insight on this.
Well, I mean, I really can't tell you what your chance of success would be because it depends on a million different factors. But what I will say is that many students do this. I quite often approved student applications for students that, completed OPT and now they're going to get a master's degree. What I would tell you in this situation is make sure you can talk about what you did, make sure you reported everything to your school and they reported everything in the SEVIS system. You should probably bring, previous transcripts, maybe a letter from your employer confirming that you worked there. And yeah, this is a pretty typical situation.
For sure. Next one, very interesting questions. Is there any expectations of this process, which is the F1 visa interview process, I assume, changed based on the upcoming election?
That's the $1,000,000 question. I don't know. I think we'll have to wait and see. What I will tell you, this is a little bit of kind of American politics 101. The US government, I mean, this election, like many elections, seems like it's huge and it's going to change everything. What I will tell you, though, is that most of the US government and most US policies are very minimally affected, if at all, by election cycles. So generally speaking, I don't think that this process will change. There may be some additional hurdles or roadblocks to a couple types of visas. Maybe you've got to do something a little bit different. But for most intents and purposes, I would expect that things will, at least related to student visas, things will continue as they have.
Sure. Next question would be very specific. I don't know if you know, Travis, but we'll just put it out there. Does F1 visa qualify for Dropbox for Nigeria?
I would have to look online. In most countries it does, but I would urge you to go to the US Embassy's website for Nigeria and double check. They should have the answer pretty
Absolutely.
recently.
I would recommend you to do a little bit of research. And Travis might not, know this part specifically. I don't know this part specifically. I think you should do more research on that because this is very important. So moving on, if I have been denied 2 times for a visa based on a name change at first, and then it just set me up for more denials, how do I get out of this? I think this could be very personal. Again, but if there's any general tips.
Yeah, this is kind of a personal issue. It seems strange that just changing a name would result in a denial. So chances are good that there's more at play here. I would urge you to reach out to a professional, and if you want to talk to us, we can try to understand what's going on and help you.
Yeah, absolutely. Scan the QR code if you wanted to talk to Mandy or Travis about this situations. Next one. All right, so this is specific questions. I've always wanted to visit Canada. A good enough reasons to go for an interview in Canada.
I mean, it could be, but if you can get an interview in your home country before the start of class, then the visa officer is going to still wonder, why are you actually here in Canada? And let me tell you, many visa officers will have this assumption that you need to kind of overcome, that somebody maybe told you that in your country, everybody's denied. And in Canada, everybody's approved. That's not true, by the way, but maybe you heard that. And so visa officers are very skeptical. You're here because you think I'm going to be soft on you and I'm just going to approve you. So yeah, it may be a good reason, but you might need a little bit more than that to explain why you're in Canada.
Very good answer. Next one, I heard about interview waivers for F1. How does that work in general?
So generally speaking, if you've had a visa, this is the Dropbox program that was alluded to a moment ago. If you've had a previous F1 visa, in many embassies, many consulates will allow you to renew that visa as long as you meet certain criteria, like it hasn't been expired for more than a certain amount of time, you haven't been refused in the interim. You can do that without actually going in for an interview. Again, check the individual website for the embassy or consulate where you plan to renew your visa, and they will give you specific requirements and then specific steps because every post is slightly different. Some require you to submit everything at the consulate itself. Some require you to go to a post office. It varies. So double check the website.
For sure. All right, let's move on to the next one. Hi, Travis. Would the sister of my grandmother and her children count as relatives?
Good question. So the DS-160 form will first ask you if you have any immediate relatives in the United States. And if you look at the little explanation, my recollection is that is parents, siblings, children. If you say yes to that, then you'll have to provide some specifics. If you say no, then quite often the next question is, do you have any other relatives in the United States? So this is getting kind of tenuous, but the fact that you know about this relative and you know, or relatives plural, and you know that they're in the United States, I would go ahead and say yes and mention them. I've had other people say, I heard when I was a kid that I had some fourth cousin twice removed that may have lived in the United States. I wouldn't say yes to that because how could you even verify that? You don't even know their name. But in this case, you're aware of these people. Yeah, they're a little bit more distant, but I would put that in the form anyway because it shows that you're honest.
Sure. Moving on to the next one. So this person understand that he or she needs to show the financial status. His or her parents cannot support, but I have 1 year tuition and living expenses. Would that be a problem?
This might be, and it will depend on your situation. Assuming that this is a 2-year program or it's something that's more than a 1-year program, the visa officer may very well want to see proof that you have the ability to pay for the whole thing before issuing your visa. And so think about where the funding is coming from, where else you might look for funds. Maybe you want to take out a student loan. Maybe your parents actually have a job, and so they will be making money while you're in the US, and next year they will have enough money. But I think the gist of this is try to have a plan in place that will cover the whole duration.
For sure. Next one, also very interesting questions. I talked about, recommendations of not going too far for day one CPT, of where are you residing. But if some situations, a person has to go to another state for school, then, do you have any general tips to how to address this situation?
I think, make sure that you can focus on your studies, attend class, graduate, and, maybe you have to travel a little bit for work, but again, that may raise some questions. Are you here to work or are you here to go to school? The purpose of this visa is to go to school. So I would think about that before I signed up for something like that.
Right, absolutely. All right, move on. I have quit my PhD before in the US due to integrity issues. If I reapply for F1, would there be any implications during the interviews?
There will be. And I'll tell you, generally speaking, I think I mentioned this earlier, a visa officer wants to see that you're progressing as a student. If you have lots of failed classes or incomplete classes, or maybe you kind of had to start a class over multiple times, or you left a PhD program, that's actually the opposite of being a progressing student. So in your case, it sounds like you have a good reason to have, quit the program. So I want you to talk about that reason. Again, be very authentic, be very honest, explain what happened and why are you trying again now? And you'll have a better chance of success.
Fun. I think we're already past time. So do you mind if we do one more, Travis, to wrap
Absolutely.
today up?
I got to tell you, I like question 25. That's my favorite question, but yeah, I
Yeah.
have some time.
We do appreciate you. All of us do appreciate you. I think in total, we have more than 100 people joining us today. So yeah, let's get to it. All right, my OPT is about to expire in next year. I will pursue my F1 with day one CPT. What's the possibility that I can get past the interview if I go back to China? but before the end of 2024.
So, okay, this is a question I can't answer without knowing much more about your situation, but I do want to say something here. I was working with a student just earlier today who left the United States, went to Brazil. She's not from Brazil, to renew her student visa. Unfortunately, she has now been in administrative processing for over a month. She's not from Brazil. She does not speak Portuguese. She has no family there. This is a problem. Now, what I always tell people is there is always a potential for delay. So build in kind of a buffer in time. If you're going back to China at the end of the year and you're planning to start class in, trying to see.
Maybe
Well,
early
or maybe you're
January.
just trying to finish your CPT. Well,
Right.
okay,
I think this
let me,
person is getting into a new program.
okay, assuming you're getting into a new program, give yourself several weeks because you may be delayed, and the last thing you want to happen is you miss the start of class. The other thing that could be happening there is you're in the middle of CPT, you're about to finish it, but you want to renew your visa right before it ends. That may be another complication because, you know, if you're just going back for a few weeks of work, is your intention to be a student or is your intention to work and then keep working? So you may face complications. Talk to an expert for sure.
Absolutely. All right, we are gonna wrap up. I want to first thanks Travis very much for hosting this webinar with me, giving us this insightful presentation as well as answering everybody's questions. Thank you so much, Travis.
Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Absolutely. And I do know that we have some questions we haven't got into. So hopefully we will invite Travis, Mandy back with us once again in the future. So you guys can also join us to learn more about visa interviews and then to get connected with ZF Visa. So if you have any, questions, inquiries that we haven't get into, you can scan the QR code, talk to our consultants, or we can also connect you with Travis so that you guys can have more in-depth conversations. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and hopefully I will see every one of you very soon. All right. Thank you so much, Travis.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Have a great night.